I think when entrepreneurship is not easy, right? The road is always tough, and amidst the bustlingness of the work and meeting a lot of people, it's always nice to come back to something more peaceful. And that's where really the terrariums that I built in my life over the last 2 years has really helped me a lot to just find some time at night to quieten down and prepare for the next hectic day that comes ahead.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Turn Off Turn On Ventures. Today we are with Bryan from NEU Battery Materials. We actually just built a terrarium together. You'll see that in the other video that we're doing together. But today, right now, we're gonna have a quick chat about who you are, what you do, and why it's important. So a bit of context, how we met. It's really interesting. There's a program called Battery MBA that's delivered out of Europe by Battery Associates. I'm the first Singaporean to go on the program, and Bryan is the second Singaporean to go on the program. And I think we both can agree that one is a great program to understand the battery industry in detail because you meet a lot of people, and two, it's cool to know a bit more about the battery industry just because it's a very important part of the energy transition. And yeah, Bryan, what anything to say?
I think the course that we met in was a fantastic course, right? Because it gives you a holistic view on batteries. And batteries are not just a small component of the energy transition that you mentioned. It's actually a key component. If every one of us wants to drive an electric car in the future, batteries is one of the big things that can make or break the industry. And it will affect things like the prices that you pay for a car, right? So if any of you out there who want to drive an electric car or even a Tesla car, for example, the battery plays a big cost, right? If the prices of the battery were to go up, you could be paying 50% more for the car. And then the question is, are you willing to pay for that? So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Bryan. I am the founder and CEO of NEU Battery Materials, and we are a lithium battery recycling company. So we recycle lithium batteries using our novel electrochemical process. So in simple terms, we use electricity to recycle lithium batteries, and that allows us to recycle it in a more clean and sustainable way without the use of acids in the process or high heat in the process. So we hope that in the future we are able to tap on clean energy like solar power to then recycle lithium batteries. So what we produce is raw material like lithium, which is the fundamental chemical or compound that is used to make batteries which power all electric cars. So it's important to look at recycling as a whole, because when we are able to supply back raw materials, we are able to offset huge amount of carbon footprint. We're able to reduce the carbon dioxide pollution that comes out of a lithium mine, for example, and we can supply back the raw materials needed so that we can continue making more electric cars, ultimately hoping that we can make EV more affordable for the layman like you and me.
That's one of the things that I found really interesting about your company, NEU Battery Materials, right? You focus on a certain battery chemistry, which I've been reading a lot about in battery news and even in mainstream news, right? I think it was only yesterday that Tesla announced that 50% of their output was it in 2021 is models or cars built with LFP.
It's actually the latest quarter release that Tesla announced. Maybe I'll just share a little bit more about battery types. To the layman, right, lithium batteries is just lithium battery. Your smartphone, your laptops, they all use lithium batteries. But within the battery family, within lithium battery, there are different types of compounds and battery types. They are all lithium based, but they have different purposes. So the most common ones are batteries that are using cobalt, nickel, and manganese. These are more high-end batteries which allow electric cars, for example, to go further distance. But ultimately, it also comes down to cost perspective. Number one is that, are you willing to pay double the price for your EV? Chances are no, right? And that's why car manufacturers are using the other cheaper type, which is what we call Lithium Iron Phosphate, LFP battery. The reason why LFP battery is cheaper is because it doesn't contain nickel, it doesn't contain cobalt as the precious metals inside the battery. And LFP as well is a lot safer to use. So it in a sense, if you look at the news where electric cars catch on fire, there's a high chance, a high probability that they are the nickel, manganese, cobalt based, NMC based. And that's why we see the transition towards LFP batteries. And like you mentioned recently, the last quarter that Tesla announced, almost 50% of their cars globally are sold using LFP batteries. Because if you look at the market trend in the recent months and years, cobalt and nickel prices have been going up. And you can also look into the unethicalities of mining of cobalt. So shifting to an LFP base does provide itself a stronger competitive advantage for companies like Tesla, because they can then sell electric cars at a more affordable price for us to buy.
Kind of going a bit deeper into what you mentioned, and I thought it'd be good to share, or even for me to understand better, right? So LFP, definitely because of the elements in the chemistry itself, they're cheaper.
Yes.
So companies like Tesla, BYD, EV companies can earn a higher margin,
Yes.
and more affordable for
Correct.
the layman to buy more cars, help the transition. You also mentioned a point about safety. So the highlight is always saying that LFP batteries are safer.
Yes.
What's the core principle around why it's safer?
In the layman explanation is, if you look at energy density, right? In a NMC battery, it's packed more closely, so you have a higher energy density, which allows you to travel further for the same type of battery, for example. Where LFP will come in is that it's not as densely packed, so it has lower energy density, which is one of its downfall per se, because you then, for the same energy, for the same weight of battery, you can't travel as far. But that means that it's safer, because you're not trying to jam pack as much energy in a small little battery, right?
Yeah.
So that presents itself a lot safer compared to the
I see.
NMC type.
I see. Okay. Let's talk a bit more about the recycling space.
Sure.
Right. Recycling is, I think for us, is a very exciting space. I definitely look a lot into the end of life for batteries, and seeing there's a huge potential and it's huge necessity for end of life management in batteries. LFP battery end of life management, LFP recycling is very niche. I haven't found many companies at all doing LFP recycling.
Yes.
I'll be honest, this is the only company I found that does LFP recycling. How could you go a bit further and explain, what exactly is electrochemistry, and you mentioned that it's cheaper and safer to do it. How so?
Okay, so the reason why we are the only company doing LFP recycling is, like what you mentioned, there is lower value in this battery, right? In order for car companies to compete on a more cost perspective level, using a cheaper battery will allow them to sell it cheaper to a consumer, right, while maintaining their margin. But the downside is, at the end of the life of that battery, it has very little value inside, right? So that's why a lot of recyclers don't recycle it. They can, but generally these recyclers don't make money out of the process, because they have to deal with wastewater treatments, they have to deal with one-time use of chemicals in the process. So where we differentiate ourselves is because our process is completely different from the industry standard. We are using electrochemical methods to recycle, which means that we actually developed a series of chemicals in the process which will regenerate. What this means is that if you put the battery, or if you crush the battery and put it into my system, we are able to extract out the raw material, for example like lithium. But my chemicals will regenerate, meaning that I can keep adding in new batteries to new feedstock into my process, without ever dealing with treatment of chemicals, without discarding any of my chemicals in the process.
Okay.
So it's a lot more sustainable in the sense that we don't deal with acids, We don't deal with any treatment or pollution in that process. And on a cost perspective, we save a lot in terms of treatment or even getting in new chemicals. So because of all this, right, we are then able to recycle LFP in a very sustainable and of course a viable business for us. And we believe that as LFP become a bigger market trend, a bigger market share for the industry, companies like BYD, Tesla, all the different car manufacturers, we can then present a solution to them. Because if you look at the market landscape, right, in the industries, for example, in China, in Europe, in US, and even in Singapore, we see a lot of regulations starting to come out to support recycling. For example, if you have a battery in Europe, you will have to deal with recycling at least 50% or 75% of the battery by weight. And even a minimum component of lithium must be recycled. Now, in the recycling industry, products like cobalt, nickel, manganese are more prioritized over lithium, for example. So we now provide an option to help these companies meet the regulations that are coming up over the next few years.
Okay. It's in my mind when I first read about your process, I was kind of taken aback because before that all I read about was your pyro-based methods where you burn for black mass, from what I understand, and that's just stage one, right? And then you have your hydrometallurgical, which is like you mentioned, the acid base, and yours is sort of a totally different field of science in a sense, which takes a while to even comprehend. But I think it's an amazing thing that you guys are bringing to the market, right? Because so much of the market in the future will be LFP batteries, and there needs to be some business that can recycle it in a viable, economically viable way. If not, you're going to have a lot of LFP trash, which is in its own way toxic and bad for the environment.
I think the industry is facing a series of problems, right, which the layman consumer might not see. Right, when you buy an electric car, you don't necessarily think about where the battery will end up at the end of it. If you buy a normal petrol car, right, ICE car, that battery can be recycled. The lead acid battery will be recycled. The different components in the car will be recycled. But in an EV car, the battery is not necessarily recycled. In fact, majority of it ends up in landfill. So if you're buying an electric car because you want to save our world, then you need to look a little bit deeper into the industry. Where does the raw materials come from? Right? Which mine are they? What's the pollution from that comes out of the mine or the manufacturing process? And if let's say 30-40% of the car is being thrown into the landfill at the end of the life, are you really pushing for a clean world? Right? So that's why recycling is very important in EV industries, because without recycling, we are not trying to solve climate change. But if you incorporate recycling, if you incorporate, for example, second life of battery, trying to extend the life of the battery, then yes, we can have a chance to solve climate change. But recycling must be one of the biggest options that we have to provide to this industry.
We've spoken before, Bryan, and I've heard a bit of your story before NEU Battery Materials, but I thought it'd be interesting just to share, your experiences as an entrepreneur, why you chose this path, and maybe one or two surprises when you got into the battery industry as a founder.
So to share a bit more about my background, I actually come from a business background. So I graduated with a business degree, no technical degree in, for example, battery or electrochemistry. Prior to that, I was doing a series of startups along the way. The reason why I took business school was because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. The question was what to do. It was not what did I want to do in the future. What business do I want to work in? So I was working on a couple of startups before that, and COVID came on to sort of disrupt my business, which ultimately led to the closure of it. But in that process, we discovered that the university I'm from, NUS, we had the opportunity to commercialize different technologies that came out from different labs. So that was when we met the inventor, Professor Wang Ting, and we realized that battery recycling could be something that would change the world. Take this, actually it was 2 years back, so about 2020, when the COVID just started, EV was just starting to pick up. Battery recycling was never a priority at that point. But we thought that this could be a chance to make a difference. So we decided to take it on. And we really struggled in the early days because, number one, COVID just started. Right? In order for me to find market validation, I need to talk to a lot of people. But the beautiful thing was when teleconference came on, Zoom for example, then I could meet people in Europe just by sitting down in my chair. But one of the biggest hurdle in the early days was that not many people cared about recycling. And I'm saying that people from the industry, because they were focused on trying to commercialize the EV section, right? Manufacturing, coming out with batteries, those were the priorities. Recycling was not yet a priority. But we kept going, and slowly we started to see the market shift. We started to reach the inflection point of the EV industry, where now mass consumers are willing to buy a Tesla car or a different EV car. And then you start to see the industry change. And when you start to face raw material shortages to make batteries, that's where recycling became a bigger priority.
Yeah.
So that's a bit about my background.
I found it quite heartening to see battery recycling technology come out from Singapore. For sure, like as a Singaporean looking into this space, a lot of them are Europe, US based, they're companies that perhaps are just more well known by news coverage. So seeing companies like yourself emerge and tackling niche, but potentially that will no longer be niche in the future. That's definitely very nice to see. Bryan, thanks so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And all the best with whatever comes up for NEU Battery Materials, which I know is very exciting. So yeah, glad to have you today. And thank you for joining. Thank you for teaching me about terrariums, which is when you told me about terrariums, I never thought that's what I was getting myself into. But had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think when entrepreneurship is not easy, right? The road is always tough, and amidst the bustlingness of the work and meeting a lot of people, it's always nice to come back to something more peaceful.
Yeah.
And that's where really the terrariums that I built in my life over the last 2 years has really helped me a lot to just find some time at night to quieten down and prepare for the next hectic day that comes in. Yeah. So I wish you all the best in your terrarium journey.
Thanks. Thank you. And hopefully we can maybe share some photos with them of
Sure.
your terrariums.
We will.
You should see them flashing now, I hope. Alright, thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
See you guys.